Thanks, Rachel. In the point of view, a 38-year-old Eastern Cape mother was found dead along with her 3 daughters this week. The mother was found hanging in her home while her 2 toddlers were lying on the bed. It's suspected that they were hanged as well. The oldest girl, a teenager, was found lying face down with multiple stab wounds. It's suspected that the mother killed her children due to distress caused by poverty and her inability to cope. What are some of the social and psychological factors that could drive a mother to this point? Clinical psychologist Dr Keitumetse Mashego gives some opinion here. Very good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time. Really, really devastating story to come across. Looking at a mother who is said to have been overwhelmed by her burdens. It's understood that she was overly indebted and looking, of course, for some sort of outlet. What do you make of this story, Dr. Mashego, especially given the context of what we understood may have happened and pushed this mother?
It's a very, very sad story indeed. Good morning to you and to your listeners. Ongoing stress that's overwhelming can lead to, psychological pathology as we are seeing play out now. So what happens is when someone is going through things due to their personality, they subconscious things below the surface. These things can be brought to the surface and manifest as behaviors or actions or reactions such as suicide, homicide, or even as we've seen in this incident, killing of your own children.
You say something important. You say due to their personality. What exactly does that mean? How does that translate into what could have possibly happened here?
So we all have our own unique personalities. Some people are more resilient than others. Some people are more reserved, introverted, extroverted. I think these are the terms that we hear, being used in society a lot. So what happens is if you have the inability, for example, to deal with failure or to seek out for help, or for example, we don't know the actual story of what happened here, but we can imagine if there was lack of support or there was a lot of trauma from where she comes from, or even in the relationship with the father of these children, or even in, dealing with the children. We don't even know their personalities as well. They could have been difficult children just because, some children are more, need more attention than others. So you can imagine all that happening on top of your stresses of making ends meet, but also just, the traumas of society today, with the power cuts, unemployment. There's so many stresses that all of us as South Africans are going through. So we are really functioning as highly anxious beings, and some people, that anxiety can push them over the edge.
Yeah, well, the motive for these deaths is not known. It's suspected, according to investigators who are still trying to, of course, get to the bottom of the final conclusion. It's suspected that it could have been driven by poverty, which is a reality in South Africa, a reality that affects people in very different ways. But, of course, here, one could perhaps also explore the possibility of mental instability. How does that now rope into the picture?
When somebody is going through stresses, usually what happens is whatever it is that was already probably happening. For example, if they, as you're saying, they had some mental health issues already, that honestly could be exacerbated by excess stress. And when someone has a mental health disorder or illness or is prone to that, what happens is the chemical imbalance. So when you have a chemical imbalance, you are basically pushed into a dark hole. For a lack of a better word. And when you are in that hole, no matter how bright the light is, you are unable to see the light. And you then come up with a solution that is sometimes so distorted, or sometimes that doesn't make sense. But for you, in that instance, it's the only thing that makes sense. And when someone is in that space, it's so difficult to just tell them to snap out of it, or to live for the sake of their children, or to have hope. So then that what they need is actually, multidisciplinary intervention, which includes psychiatric intervention, medication, and ongoing psychotherapy. So, it's very sad what has honestly happened, especially with the children. And it's also difficult because in society there's so much stigma around seeking help. So people don't seek help until they're in crisis mode. So mental health, really, we still need to do a lot of work to encourage people to seek help. And it does not mean you're crazy when you do seek help. So there's still a lot of stigma that we need to address generally.
Yeah. Well, with the stigma that we need to address, another perhaps important aspect is to, within Women's Month, make mention of the kind of challenges that black women are facing in the country, single black women who are heading households on their own, looking after the children. And if you look further into the story and some of the reports on it, it's a description of a mother who was described as an introvert who was heavily indebted because apparently a debt collector was going to check in on her when he or she made this shocking discovery. That in itself speaks to some of the big challenges of being overly indebted and not knowing where to look for help.
Definitely. Being a parent itself is stressful. Being a single parent in South Africa, unemployed, is actually, even more stressful. So I can only but imagine what she was going through. And on top of it, if she was already, feeling overwhelmed by the situation with 3 children. As I said, if she was already struggling with mental health issues, there's a likelihood that then that just transpired into what we're seeing play out now as her taking her life and her children's life. And we always want to attach logic when it comes to pathology or emotions or, being overwhelmed, but there is no logic. Right? There is no logic because people will sit there and say, but how will you do that to your own children? But when you are in that state, the only thing that made sense to her was to get out of this situation was how she saw fit, which is quite tragic, right? But, when you are in that state, there is no logic. Sometimes people actually become what we call psychotic, where they lose touch with reality and their choices are so distorted that they don't make sense to onlookers. And hence it's so important to always seek out for help, which is always difficult, especially for introverts, as they describe.
Yeah. I mean, onlookers will judge the situation harshly, but when one looks at the psychosocial support systems that may be available free of charge, I mean, what are the options in impoverished communities? And also perhaps expand a little bit on some of the symptoms that, maybe a vigilant community member or family member can look out for that speaks for a cry for help, perhaps red flags that really show that this is a desperate situation which could end deadly, like in this case?
I think it's always behavior. So someone who they must just look out for their behaviors, like in terms of, are they, for example, sleeping a lot, sleeping less? Are they restless? Are they more panicky? Are they just the appetite, how is that going? Of course, in this situation, there was, dear hunger all the time. But, just looking at their sleeping patterns, but also how they dealing with the stress. Are they now, if they're introverted, are they even more quiet and more reserved and unable to actually just get out of the house? Sometimes you see that people lose touch with reality in that they don't make sense in the things that they say, but also just them talking about life being overwhelming. So the things that they say, talking about ending it all or just, being frustrated. So just their actions, their behaviors, their reactions, and also the change in behavior that can really be red flags. Sometimes it goes the other way, where someone who's quiet, to interject, sometimes when someone is quiet becomes now more outspoken, or they're just more spontaneous in spending their money or in drinking, for example, substance use. And substance is not just alcohol or drugs. It can also just be medication, where someone is always asking for a Panado daily, just so they can get by through the day.
So where's help at hand in such situations?
I always encourage people that go to your nearest clinic and find out where the nearest clinical psychologist services are, because clinical psychologists do operate in the public sector in clinics for free, or in public hospitals or in tertiary hospitals. But I think the first place is just to contact the nearest public clinic and find out from the sisters, the nurses, where the nearest psychologist or psychiatric clinic is, and facilitate, help them, get them appointment if you're a neighbor. But if it's for yourself, do that for yourself. And I know that people always deem that clinical psychologists, that we are pricey, but there are free services available. You might have to wait a little bit longer to get their appointments, but there are appointments that are available out there. So just encourage the nearest clinic to intervene, and also social workers in the area to intervene if you're worried about a neighbor or someone nearby.
How can communities help and perhaps assist such a situation?
I think we need to understand that we are humans and we're not the same. Some people, we can have the same stresses and we are impacted differently just because of how we made up. And no, there's no right or wrong way of being. It's just how we are wired. So I think we need to also embrace that in our humanity, that I'm not going to handle stress the same way as you. And it's okay, and it's understandable. We just need to ensure that we get you the support you need in the way that you need it, and to be less judgmental of people going through stress. For example, in this case, people will say that, but everyone else around her is going through the same things, but people don't handle things the same for varying reasons. So let's also just be kind to one another in that way. But I think the first point of contact, if someone is concerned, is to get professional help, like social workers in the area to intervene, and not to take it upon yourself as a lay person to assist where you're not trained to assist.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Thanks for this discussion. Clinical psychologist Dr. Keitumetse Mashego.